Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network.
Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over.
Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you'd get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Cath, thanks for joining me on the Australian Investors Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We've spoken before a few times. This is our first time recording a podcast together, and I'm just humbled that you can take some time out of your busy day and come down and join me just across Melbourne CBD. Why don't we start with, for those who don't know you and haven't heard you speak before, I'm sure many are familiar with the business that you run.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your background. If I'm not mistaken, you've got 3 degrees, you've lived in 4 countries, and I don't think you started your career at Accenture, but you may have worked there at one time, for reference.
Yeah, that's right. So I've had a terrific career, and I've been blessed to have been a true global citizen. So you're spot on. So 3 degrees, earned in Queensland and in Victoria. Decided at the age of 21 that I should move from Brisbane to Melbourne. I did start life at Accenture, although I'm that old. It used to be called Anderson Consulting at the time.
Okay.
And look, from there, that really just provided a springboard to going overseas. I have lived and worked in the UK, United States, Brazil, Singapore, and of course, my home, Australia.
Yeah.
It's been a wonderful career, mainly in risk management, financial services, consulting. In each of those roles, though, it was always about building a business, a function, a product. And so for me, it was when I came across the Selfwealth opportunity, it was just ticked so many boxes in terms of my past experience. And looking at the opportunities that lay ahead in terms of building out self-wealth. So I do believe that, a varied career and varied life experience sets you up really well as a business leader.
Yeah, for sure it does. We'll get to the role in just a moment. But Selfwealth's a sponsor of this podcast, so many people are familiar with the brand. Many of them are users. But can you tell us kind of the origin story of Selfwealth, how it started, and maybe if you bring us up to the time that you got involved, however long you want to take? It's a long time, but if you can take us from kind of like what was the initial idea through to where it is now?
Yeah, I loved the genesis of Selfwealth. It was one of the things that really attracted me to it. So Selfwealth was started as a Facebook for investors. It was a community established so that investors, DIY investors could jump on, share their knowledge, share their tips, at times share their frustrations. And that really, gave birth to our community feel. Which is something that we have continued on 10 years later. I think, when you look at the brief history of Selfwealth, starting from that community base, it became apparent a couple of years into the Selfwealth journey that, investors were also looking for a reliable, low-cost, high-value platform in which to invest in ASX equities. So that came to life in 2016. Continued on the development listing in late 2017. The ASX listing was really about to raise capital to build out the marketing budget and, of course, hire more technology resources to further enrich the platform experience. That was done in a very pragmatic way, like any good fintech startup story in Australia. Of course, there were highs and lows associated with that journey. And it really became, a continuing of development until, 2020, late 2020, when we added the US equities functionality onto the platform as well. And then, of course, this teeny tiny thing called COVID came, which provided incredible tailwinds for Selfwealth. And bearing in mind that Selfwealth was the first to introduce flat fee brokerage in Australia, we really set the mould and continue to set the mould in terms of new innovations on the platform. And, it really was a case of during those COVID months, the early months, that the growth at Selfwealth was exponential as we welcomed more and more investors onto the platform. We were the only platform in Australia that stood up during the entire GameStop trading that happened in February that year as well. Right. So, I think Selfwealth really established its credibility as not only being low cost, but truly robust and sustainable. So I joined in April 21, so it's been about 18 months now since I started the Selfwealth journey. And so, when I started in April 21, it was a case of looking at all the incredible assets that we already had, including our people, and really figuring out what the growth path was going to be based on what our investors were requesting of us.
So a few things here. April 2021, this was like we were emerging from COVID, but it's still very much a thing. There were lockdowns or people, isolating and those types of things. And you're coming into this business that's just experienced huge growth. I guess there are two questions in this is, how did you come across the role, first of all? And then how did you assess the business and what you could do with it?
So after spending 20 years abroad, working for, the largest multinationals in the world and having senior leadership positions there, what I really wanted was to find an Australian company, that I could wrap my arms around, to grow, to build, to set the standard. And so, it was through a friend, as these things always are, a recruiter friend. And look, she said to me, hey, there's this company and I think you'd be great at it. And so, looking a little bit further, I, of course, got pretty excited pretty quickly, as I certainly learned about the market landscape. And so for me, it was a very easy decision to accept the role. And when I see, the opportunities available, not only did we already have a terrific user experience and a good team, but, I saw very quickly how the market landscape was changing. With those COVID tailwinds, with any tailwind that you get as a business, you can never take anything for granted. So it was really thinking about, okay, so, what have we got today? What do I think is going to happen in terms of the overall marketplace, not just with, COVID was going to diminish at some time. More and more, platforms were coming into the space. That's what happens when the addressable market doubles. And, that's what did happen. Retail investors, they grew from 700,000 at the end of 2019 to, figure around 1.4 million today. So that doubling happened over a very quick period of time, which brought in more competition. But it was really figuring out, no business can just do the same again and again and again. It's about continuous adaptation, continuous learning from what the clients need, and looking at some of the macro factors that were happening within the investor landscape in Australia. So they really were the premise from which, I set out Selfwealth's new strategy.
So there are quite a few things here. In terms of employees, how big was Selfwealth then, say just before you took over, and now, just to give us a sense of the scale and where you've taken it?
Sure. So in April 21, there were 25 employees, all based in Surrey Hills, in out
of East Melbourne.
Out of East Melbourne.
We,
the office space only had desks for 19.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, Selfwealth is the classic fintech story, starting from the garage and slowly upgrading. And so, pretty quickly I realised that, we needed to grow in terms of our team. So today we have over 60 people in our Melbourne CBD offices.
Yep.
So again, an opportunity brought to us because of COVID in terms of being able to afford cheaper rent on CBD buildings. And we've also now established teams in Malaysia and in India as well. So, we have over 15 people in those two locations. So, again, it's about building a sustainable business model where we can, reduce our operating costs by having some of the functions overseas. But, we really are a Melbourne-based company, and we're very proud of our Melbourne status.
Yeah, I've seen the office. I love it. It's a new building, and there's a few other financial services organizations in the building. So as I was looking, you see in the lobby, you see the list of names. I was like, oh, there's actually a lot of finance going on in this building. So you're in a good spot. So that's a bit of growth. You've gone from 25 to say 60 odd. You've developed teams overseas. How did you set out? And this is where I'm really interested in, is how you set out team structures and design the organization for like the efficient outcomes, because you're coming in during a period of rapid growth. Obviously, you've seen this from the outside before many times. How did you think about designing teams from the top down, horizontal? How do you think about that?
Yeah. And, having built many teams before and, business units before, you do need to give careful consideration to, firstly, transforming Selfwealth into an agile organisation, and not just, putting up a couple of posters that says, hey, we're agile. It really was about making sure that we had the right new skill sets in place. Around product ownership, whilst also making sure that we build out our technology function in the correct way. And, one of Selfwealth's advantages is, we have people who have been at Selfwealth and technology from day one.
Yeah.
And their experience and knowledge is just highly valuable. So we wanted to cultivate that. But of course, we needed to add new skill sets and new development skills, into that technology function as well. And so, we had to put ourselves on our own learning. So it was Agile 101 and figuring out what Agile felt like from a Selfwealth perspective. And I also believe that, especially in a fintech environment, people, the value comes from collaboration. And so people need to feel part of something. They need to go into, I call it their own tribe. People also need to continuously learn themselves. So it's about making sure that we've got those structures in place so that people who are more junior in nature feel like they have someone to look to, someone to learn from. So from a product technology point of view, we established communities around product owners, Scrum Masters, of course, our front-end, back-end development as well. And the area that I really wanted to build out was our data and analytics capability, which we've given focus to. The other really important development that we made is, Selfwealth is very proud. We've been nominated a number of times in terms of having the best client service. And that is something that, I wanted to continue. So, again, people investment into customer service so that, our clients know that there is someone that is going to be there for them when they need it. And then, of course, marketing. We went from a team of one, to a team of five. And, you can really get carried away with marketing costs, and
for sure,
got to be very careful in terms of your return on investment. And so really making sure that, we had, again, that right skill set in place for marketing.
Yeah, it seems like a lot, right? But you've been doing it for 18 months. Based on your vision, how far do you think you are through that journey?
Yeah, so I always like to think of transformation journeys in waves, and this is the second wave for Selfwealth. We're over halfway in the progression. So, look, we've done what I feel is the hard yards in terms of, establishing the broader team, figuring out what works and, frankly, what doesn't work. And you continuously have to adapt. So, look, now we've got those pieces in place. What we're looking forward to is, to be able to get the benefit from it.
For sure.
But look, continuously adapting and learning and looking to bring in, some more talent into the organisation as well.
So in terms of the landscape, because it seems very dynamic, at least it has been the last few years, like you said, more competition. Obviously the pioneers of fixed cost brokerage, and kudos to you, just moved into the 3rd spot in Australia.
Thank you. Yes.
By market share, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, yes.
How do you see that evolving over time? And then maybe we'll start to segue into where you're taking the business, like what it is now versus in 5 years' time, say. So let's start with the market dynamics. How has that been characterized over the last few years, and how do you see the success from Selfwealth playing out?
Yeah, and look, thank you. We have very recently found out that we occupy the number 3 position.
Podium.
Yes.
Yep.
So 2 banks ahead of us. And for those who are very good at math, that will, of course, equate that we have taken over 2 of the big 4 banks.
Yep.
So again, that in itself is an achievement. I know there's a lot of fintechs out there whose business model is all about getting market share from the banks. So, obviously we want that to continue. We believe that we've got the experience and the client service ready to fully take on the banks. But look, the market landscape has changed a lot and will continue to change. 5-6 years ago, it was about, flat fee brokerage. That truly was innovative and enough to be a differentiator. Now progressing forward, addressable market has doubled. I obviously, with the current state of the economy and inflation, et cetera, and of course the equities markets, that doubling of growth, I don't believe will happen again, and it's slowing down. That's just a reality in terms of the number of retail investors currently in the Australian market. So I think with that, and of course, so many new entrants coming in specifically into the equities space and competing on nothing more than a price point. Selfwealth decided over 12 months ago that our strategy is about wealth creation for retail investors. And that means, listening to our clients and figuring out, well, what does wealth mean for retail investors? And it can mean different things to different people. So it's about figuring out, what the asset type should be on the platform, what the experience should be, cutting out some of the pain points, around tax reporting, for example. And the real differentiator for us is our investment and our belief in providing independent thought leadership, content, education, providing a thorough set of information for our investors to utilise as they see fit. I do believe that, we do have a responsibility in terms of providing that independence so that, those retail investors can feel confident, can learn. And frankly, I'd like to see, that happen a lot more in Australia. Our motto is it is about creating financial freedom for people.
I think that what you're getting towards as a platform is really interesting, which is building out a wealth platform, right? And it's kind of that next evolution as like an industry, I think, shuffling across into that and capturing more of that pie as well. How do you juxtapose Selfwealth today versus what it could be in 5 years? Like, what's the vision that you're working towards?
Yeah, so very much low cost, high value, wealth creation for retail investors in Australia. And that transitions it from what it was, which was, a flat fee ASX equities platform. It's that's a very singular focus. So one where we're moving toward is it's a true community of retail investors, and people can choose their own communities. So if they're interested, for example, in ESG, being able to have a platform that caters for that sort of investment appetite. We will soon be bringing on crypto, but doing it in a very self-wealth way. So, they're providing 5 coins on the platform and making it as simple as possible. But again, having information, content available to people, outlining the risks and the volatility so that they can go in eyes wide open and be able to make the decisions that they need. And look, that's what we're going to do across multiple asset types on the platform.
Yeah, right. So it's going to be more holistic rather than just equities focus.
Correct. Yeah. Multiple asset types, and we'll continue to be a mechanism for people to make their own decisions and assessment on wealth.
How about the data? You've got over 125,000 investors on the platform now. You mentioned before that that's a focus for you. What would you love to be able to do with that data? Because I imagine there's heaps of it and more every day being created.
Yes.
What could you do with that? How could you use that?
And you're right. So one of Selfwealth's differentiators is we do have 5 years of trading data on our platform, and it's extensive and it's of a high quality, and it's something that we guard fiercely. Selfwealth will not be selling our clients' data to anybody. But in terms of what we can do with it, it has to be to the benefit of our investors that are on the platform. And so again, I refer back to communities. So, we do have some functionality in terms of, follow me, trading. For those who subscribe to it, they can see, who the top investors are. They can look to see what they've invested in. They can move their portfolio to, people who they deem to have similar investment appetites to them. And again, it's about building out more of a, I guess, unique experience to the investor. But, they need to kind of tell us what they're looking for, or if they want it to be completely not related to their investment decisions, they can still go in and make those independent decisions themselves.
I know, because I host the Selfwealth Live on Wednesday nights. I get to see the data if you go. And I think I actually noticed this on Twitter, which is my preferred social media. I actually noticed that people are starting to pick up on that as well. They're starting to use the data to see what the community thinks and track that through time. It's really interesting.
Correct.
One question that I know one of our regular guests, fund manager Luke Winchester, who comes on the show, when he looks at companies, because you're listed on the stock exchange, people can dial in for the quarterlies and so on. One of the things that he always likes to think about is like the metrics that you follow as the CEO. What are the things that you look at every day to know that you're doing the right job? And then I guess for us as investors, looking at Selfwealth as an investment itself, how can we think about that as well? Yeah,
I'm a very data-oriented person. Indeed, I have been a self-described data nerd. Okay. So there's a variety of metrics that I use on a daily basis. There's, of course, your bread and butter, trade volumes, value on the platform, cash on the platform, et cetera, et cetera. But the metrics that I take great interest in are more oriented to our client base. So for me, actively looking at the engagement on the platform, which means not necessarily the number of people who have traded during the day, but those people, how many people have jumped onto the platform to check their portfolios, to check to see what's happening in the market, looking at content and education, materials that we provide, and, the engagement on that. For me, I find that, A, exciting, but B, really tells a story in terms of engagement that needs to be highly valued. I do also look at, we've implemented a system to help support our client service function. We look at the satisfaction rates from each of the chats and et cetera. So I monitor that on a daily basis. the intel that gives, it's not so much about is the client service team doing a good job, because I think they do a great job in the trenches, but it's about feedback on the platform.
Of course.
And particularly after we've put in a change and we're, always putting in updates to our production environment. It's just a really good pulse. And look, no business can exist unless you are listening to your customer base.
For sure. I know, and we're fortunate from the outside because we get to see what the company is doing each quarter. How has it changed for you being a listed company CEO? Yes.
So I've always worked for publicly listed companies. However, now in the CEO chair, look, for me, I've always valued transparency and governance, and I think, again, it's a differentiator of Selfwealth compared to some of the new challenger platforms who are not listed. For me, I want people to be aware of, our financial stability, where we're making investments. I love the idea of Selfwealth being a bit of a co-op in terms of, people investing in the ASX, but, hopefully investing into us as shareholders. So, whilst, of course, there is paperwork and reporting and deadlines and a whole raft of rules that, I needed to learn pretty quickly around the ASX specifically, for me, it is an advantage that Selfwealth is listed. And, I think to that point, I would make the point around some of the newer challenger brands, right? And, I like being able to stand up and say, look, we have a sustainable business model here, right? There's a reason why we haven't played the race to the bottom. We want Selfwealth to be here for decades, not days. And playing that race to the bottom in terms of zero brokerage or very, very low cost brokerage, it just doesn't work in the Australian market, the way in which, the costs are set up from ASX, ASIC, a whole host of costs. So, that's not a game that we're willing to play because we don't want to jeopardise our clients' holdings and cash, et cetera. We're here for decades.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that there's a cost, right? Unlike, say, the United States, here in Australia we have one primary exchange, which has, hefty fees as well. You look at the ASX itself, you look at their company reports, you can see the fees flowing to them. So, I certainly understand that. One final question, Cath, which is a little bit off the beaten track, which is just how do you spend a typical day then? We talked then about looking at engagement and just the standard metrics, the financial metrics. What does a typical day look like?
Yeah, I try and spend 50-50 time between 50% internally, working with the team leaders, investing into them, making sure that, things are on track or et cetera. The other 50% of my time, it is more externally focused. There's a lot of, exciting technologies and fintechs that are out there and not just in Australia but abroad, and really thinking about potential applicability to a Selfwealth experience, and also meeting new people, learning from them. Every person you meet, there's something to learn. And so I think that combination gives a rounded view as a CEO.
Yeah, I like that. There's always something to learn. Shows the growth mindset.
Definitely.
Well, Cath, thanks for taking some time to join me today.
Thank you very much.